Toy makers are warning the price and availability of toys could look very different in the months ahead because of tariffs.
Well, maybe the children will have 2 dolls instead of 30 dolls, you know, and maybe the 2 dolls will cost a couple of bucks more than they would normally.
Might be more than a couple of bucks. In the U.S., the cost of, let's say, one Barbie sold at Target has increased by 43% already. Meanwhile, Canadian and U.S. toy companies are tweaking their supply chains and signaling that more price hikes are coming. For more on how Trump's tariffs are affecting toys, we are joined in studio, which is great to have you here, by Moshe Lander, Senior Lecturer of Economics at Concordia University. I'm used to talk, you know, you come in here for the first time, Moshe, in studio, and I just spilled hot tea all over him and his phone. But we got it cleaned up, so thanks for being here.
Well, that's the your morning welcome, right?
Yes. Now you're only going to do us remote. Listen, we know that this has to do with tariffs, in particular tariffs with China. China is the world's #1 toy manufacturer, and last year the U.S. bought more than $40 billion worth of toys from China. That's more than any other country. How could this ongoing trade war upend that industry?
Well, what you're going to have right now is that the tariffs are going to slowly change the supply chain. And so you and I have spoken numerous times about how supply chains are slow to move. But what's going to happen is that over time, you're going to go buy your toys from somewhere else. And Donald Trump foolishly said, instead of buying 20, only buy 5 dolls, which shows his disconnect. But what's going to happen eventually is that these goods are going to get diverted, maybe to Canada, maybe elsewhere. And people are going to have to either buy less or pay more.
Well, we wanted to see the Canadian angle on this story. So Spin Master Toys, very popular here at Canadian toy makers. They have stopped issuing guidance to investors for the rest of the year. They are blaming U.S.-China trade war. Why would U.S. tariffs on China affect a Canadian toy company?
So it depends on where they're getting their parts, right? So if it's entirely manufactured here in Canada, then they might be able to avoid any of the issues. But let's say that those parts are coming from China, they're landing in the port of Los Angeles, which means they get hit with tariffs, and then as those parts work their way up to Canada, there's now a higher cost, which means there's a higher cost then to the consumer that's going to be passed on at some point. So it's probably going to be difficult to insulate yourself or to try and convince to come through the port of Vancouver if that's coming on one of those huge cargo ships where this is only one part of that.
Again, this just speaks to the globalization of trade that we live in now. Experts say that U.S. customers are used to inexpensive items like toys from China being very readily available. Lots of choice. That's part of how they live. Consumers in other countries could take advantage of those cheap toys that would have gone to the U.S. And you say Canadians would only benefit from that. How does that work?
So it's possible if those goods have already been manufactured and they're not going to make it to American shelves, then you got to dump it somewhere. And I'm not saying dump it in a nasty sense. It's just you got to sell them. You've made them. So those are the types of things that could come to Canada. And so you could overstock the shelves where you might find that that pushes prices down. Overstock anything, prices are going to go down. But the issue is that in the medium to long term, does the Chinese company actually start scaling back production, just saying, all right, if we're not going to sell in the U.S. anymore, let's just not make it at all. You can't sell as much to Canada as you could to the U.S. So at some point, they're going to have to either scale back production. So the benefits might only be there for a limited amount of time for Canadians.
Well, speaking of time is ticking because the holiday gift-giving season is around. They can't decide if it's 23 or 33 weeks from today. Spin Master is calling for action to, quote, save Santa's supply chain. That's sort of how they're billing it. Would it make sense to buy toys for the holidays now, trying to get a jump on these price increases or supply shortages?
You should always be looking for deals. I don't think that has any, I mean, that's a year-round exercise, right? So that's not just a function of December. It's you should always be looking for when is there going to be a deal available, and if you can find it, grab it, not just because of the tariffs, but because you never know what's going to come along. And so if you're looking for something in particular, or if you're flexible, then if you find the deal that strikes you, go for it.
So really quickly, Moshe, the tariffs that would affect toys that are coming from the U.S. into Canada would be sort of this 25%, not the 140-some% that's being placed on China.
No, it could be the 145%, because if it's a tariff on Chinese goods coming into the U.S., that's 145. Doesn't necessarily mean, though, that the price of the Barbie is going to go up 145. It's how much do they want to hold on to their bottom line before they pass it on to the consumer.
Oh, you know, toys wasn't an industry that people were really thinking about before tariffs landed, but good to have you here to discuss it. Thanks,
Anytime.
Moshe. Glad to have you in person.